Why did the chicken cross the road? Please bear this in mind throughout the rest of this episode. Welcome to another episode of Lemme School. Today we will be talking about information and the conveyance of it. To kick off this episode, let us first discuss the concept of Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun describes how every element of a story should contribute to the whole. The direct quote from Anton Chekhov was, translated of course, "If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there." To use an example most of you should know, let's look at the movie Aliens by James Cameron. In the movie, before the crew ventures out, we see the power loader, and we get an idea of how it's being operated and even that Ripley can operate it. After this, the movie actually takes us away from this location to somewhere completely different, and the movie goes on. There's a bunch of killings, spooks, some of the best one-liners in movie history, and eventually Ripley has to fight the big bad mother alien. But being severely overpowered and underarmed, she needs help. This is where she uses the power loader from the earlier scene and uses it to kick the alien's butt. In this case, the power loader is Chekhov's gun. It was conveyed to us that it existed, so when it's needed to come into play, we didn't feel it came out of nowhere. It should also be noted that it was shown in this movie and not the prior one. This is because a setup only works for as long as the payoff is not too far from it. Omne trium perfectum. Everything that comes in free is perfect. In story writing, there's a rule of threes that many writers who don't just play off the seat of their pants needs to remember. Setup, reminder, and payoff. I will bet a lot of money that a lot of well-written fiction you may like is using this rule in some shape or form. It can once again be used with Chekhov's gun. First you show the gun, later you remind people that the gun exists, and then eventually you have the character grab the gun and fire it. In Star Wars we see Obi-Wan reveals his lightsaber to Luke, then later he uses it again in the bar, and then eventually he whips it out to battle Darth Vader. If we remove either one of these three, we will have a worse product as a result. If we remove the initial setup, the foreshadowing as you also may know it as, the reminder is gonna become the setup in its stead, and as of such, it will feel like you're more or less just introducing something in the final act just to have it pay off. Imagine Raiders of the Lost Ark if we hadn't seen that Indiana Jones was afraid of snakes before the payoff. Imagine if they had introduced that, say, 15 minutes before it comes into play. Then you've essentially set something up only to have it being paid off, and it becomes obvious to the audience what is going on, which is typically where they'll feel talked down to. Telling a story is a lot like watching a play. It's all about depiction and trickery. If you can see the things going on behind the scenes, you're not gonna be immersed in the story, and as of such, the experience will fail. So setting the story up too close to the payoff will make it obvious that there's a setup only to have a payoff. Now let us remove the reminder. A lot of stuff happens in a story. Demanding your audience keeps track of every little minute detail throughout the entire thing is asking a lot of your audience, and you gotta remember they're here to be entertained, not to do homework. You can't very well ask your audience to take literal notes. This is what the reminder is for, to help the audience understand that this is not just a trivial thing. A reminder is probably the one of these three you can actually remove, but it all depends on the information conveyed. For example, you tell a joke. You don't constantly have to remind people what the setup is, cause a joke is typically set up and then immediately paid off the moment after. The movie Batman the Dark Knight has several scenes where it's introducing something and then it pays it off later, with Harvey Dent for example. Harvey is shown to have an affection for flipping a coin to decide various things, for example. We see him do this several times, and then at the end the obsession with the coin becomes a distraction enough for him that Batman can eventually tackle him and sort out the hostage situation. Have we not seen him still being obsessed with the coin after his transformation into Two-Face? This whole thing would feel weird and forced, because we have gotten so much information throughout the movie and so much has in turn happened to Harvey. It is because we see him still obsessed with the coin after this change that we see this is something that has remained despite the changes that has happened to Harvey's character. In other words, we have seen Chekhov's gun taking a beating, but we have still been shown that it's able to shoot. Lastly is the payoff. Everyone should know what a payoff is and why it's important. What good is there to have a joke without a punchline? The payoff is what gives meaning to the former too. It's what validates it. It's what rewards the audience that has been paying attention. The payoff is essential because just like what I talked about in the episode about ending something, it is what gives something meaning. Using Chekhov's gun as an example again, if there's no payoff and no one shoots it, then it just becomes another set piece. It becomes a part of the environment. It is as important in the scene as the table, the chair and the coffee mugs. If you're not using the elements you set up, you are also just wasting people's time. If you have a character again and again mention how their favorite color is blue and they give a backstory on why their favorite color is blue and then don't do anything with it, then, well, we know they like the color blue, but that means nothing to us. Our time has been wasted. We get information we didn't need when we could have been given information that we did need. Like, okay, Indiana is afraid of snakes and Ripley can operate a power loader. So? Like, sure, they're interesting character traits and quirks, but so what? I was discussing something with my friends and they said something that I think is quite vital when it comes to the conveyance of information. I'm paraphrasing, but the quote was more or less, "Why would I stick around for the dessert if I had a bad experience with the appetizer, the main course, and I've been sat waiting for the dessert for an hour?" One of the hardest things about being a reviewer of webcomics is that it is like games as a service, like Destiny or Warframe or what have you. It's being published a piece at a time, and if you're not fond of the stuff you've seen thus far, why should you stick around on the off chance that it becomes better? Now, given it's a silly and outright immature to just throw your hands in the air and say something is terrible just cause one thing didn't sit well with you. Just cause the appetizer wasn't good doesn't mean the main course and dessert can't be delicious. It's like I stated in my Yosh review, where if I come into your comic and your comic doesn't grab me for 500 pages, then it doesn't matter if page 2000 and onwards are really good. It's the exact same with information. If you give the audience so little to work with for such a long period of time and you don't remind them that you are aware, then it's not unfair to assume you just either forgot or overlooked something. Setting something up and then having it be a plot hole for several thousands of pages or hours and not reminding the audience of it only to then tackle it doesn't mean it wasn't a plot hole. The reason for this is because this might just have been an incentive for someone to just drop your story altogether before it got explained. Cause you gave no sign that you were on top of it. Your appetizer was bad, your main course was undercooked, and I'm not gonna wait around for an hour just for you to finally bring me the good dessert. A good writer will as such, if we continue the analogy, keep your table up to speed. Your food is right around the corner. It's supposed to taste like this. Trust me, the dessert is to die for. It has never been the audience's job to stay throughout the entirety of your story. It has always been and will always be your job as an author to make sure they're interested in seeing your story to the end. If you disagree with this, are you then not at fault for not having watched the entirety of every series you've ever watched? Game of Thrones has the whole Battle of the Bastards scene, which is freaking amazing, but I won't decry anyone who lost interest up to that point. And that's not their problem, it's the creator of the media. Now to give the information. Primarily, information in a story should work on its own merit. You should, in other words, not have to seek information outside of the media. That is reserved for something that is called ergodic literature. The word ergodic comes from the Greek words ergon, that means work, and hodos, meaning path, basically meaning you have to work to walk down the path. Ergodic literature is, in other words, stuff where you have to do more work than just turning a page or reading what's on it. Ergodic literature absolutely has a place, don't get me wrong. I mean, if it didn't, Nick Nocturne wouldn't have anything to cover, cause yeah, ARGs are a type of ergodic literature. But they have a place cause they use the work you have to do to their advantage. ARGs, for example, have a thing where you almost feel like a detective, someone who's tripped over something they shouldn't have, and now you are uncovering and piecing a story you have nothing to do with together. But a normal story? Does it belong there? Absolutely 100% without a shadow of doubt, no. Keep all your information where people are consuming the information. You can have a Wikipedia, blogs, YouTube videos, disclose information on a Discord somewhere. That's fine. Just be sure it's first and foremost revealed in the medium it centers around. I cannot believe this is not common knowledge. Any screenwriter, any author, any publisher, any editor, any director will tell you this. It's fine to enhance an experience with supplementary material like having to read a book and then seeing a movie of the book and there's little Easter eggs referring to the book. That's fine. But vital information, world building information, that needs to be right there in the story. So that's a brief little lesson on the topic of information. I might revisit this topic again someday, but for now, this has been Lemme School Ya, here to help you make your creative work with a little more skill. And to prove a point, go to my Twitter and see the tweet that's linking to this video.